Geek Cross, the podcast where faith and culture intersect. I'm your host, Jeremy Yoder, and each episode we look at a topic related to pop culture or geekdom and have conversations that use science fiction, fantasy, gaming, or comic books as a jumping off point to talk about deeper issues and to wrestle with the big questions of life. My guest today is Abigail Smith, who's a good friend of mine. Welcome, Abby, and could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, I'm Abby Smith. I am 37 years old. I probably been a geek all my life because I started out, my dad had me watching Doctor Who. When from a young age, I remember John Pertwee and Tom Baker and all of those, the bold black and white Doctor Who. I discovered comic books in high school, the X-Men, Hulk, somewhat of the Avengers, mainly Marvel. I'm in a wheelchair. I was born with spina bifida, where part of my spine was formed outside of the body. Yay. So,
well, could you tell us a little bit about what it's like growing up with that kind of disability?
It's difficult. You stand out because I was in a wheelchair, so I obviously couldn't blend in with the crowd. I had people staring at me. I had people thinking I was weird. I'd had people coming up and asking me questions, which I didn't mind as much because I'd rather people ask questions and learn rather than just kind of stare and be left ignorant. I did go to normal school. I went through regular school. I had IEPs, which are independent educational plans, so that I could be mainstreamed. I had no problem with doing the work. I'm I have the intelligence, but they had to make sure that with the wheelchair, everything was accessible and adapted to cater to me.
What does it mean to be mainstreamed?
Mainstreamed means when a disabled student, whether it's physically, mentally disabled, is put into regular classrooms rather than like a special class, not special ed or a separate class. You're with the regular students.
So it's trying to put you into as much of a typical position that most other students would find themselves in.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, all right. So you talked about being a geek and that you were a geek from an early age.
Yes.
What did that mean for you growing up with this disability and with the challenges of having spina bifida?
I was already on the margins. I was already kind of weird. So it just added to my weirdness. I liked it. It was kind of a special thing. Like with Doctor Who, it was from Britain, and not many people knew about it. It was like late night in the weekends on PBS, and it was something I shared with my dad and my brother and sister. And
so you're actually a fan of the classic Doctor Who?
Yes.
I mean, most people these days, right? Myself included, have a hard time with it, partly because, mostly because the pacing is so slow.
Yeah. That's what I grew up with. I actually have some issues with the newer stuff and some of the ways they do it, and especially when they're getting really with the technology and the CGI, and they make it so much better. And part of what I loved about old Doctor Who was the campy set, the campiness, the obviously fake set, the Daleks with the plunger and the whisk. Not something that looks like a plunger and a whisk, but an actual plunger and whisk. I mean, it had this whole campiness to it that I absolutely love.
So you don't think that the bad CGI in the new episodes is the same thing as a plunger and a whisk?
No.
No.
I don't. It's not as creative. I don't. CGI can do wondrous things, especially when it's used well. I mean, if you look at the Lord of the Rings movies, I think Peter Jackson knows how to use it and use it well. But when you're going for something campy or silly, it's a lot harder to use it that way. Whereas with what they were doing in the old Doctor Who is they were taking what they could find to make things, because they didn't have a huge budget. And so you're just kind of left to your own devices and getting as creative as you can. Whereas with CGI, even bad CGI, well, what can we come up with? How fanciful can we be? And you can still do it, whether it's done really, really well or done really, really bad.
What was it about the Doctor that you related to so much?
I liked the sense of adventure. He was always going off and saving people, and I liked that. I always wanted to travel, see the world, see different worlds if that were a possibility. What I really liked is his companions. Usually, I mean, there are male companions, but the ones I remember are the strong female characters.
Like Zoe. There was a Zoe, right?
So there was a Zoe, yes, but actually I'm talking, I think my favorite, she's called Romana, and she was actually from Gallifrey. She was a Time Lord. Mm-hmm. They don't make no distinction between, if I remember correctly, they make no distinction between male and female. It's just Time Lord. And she was a companion with the Doctor, and she could keep up with them, and she was just smart as a whip and just in the action and very strong. The other was Leela, and he got her from, she was like the Amazon. She wasn't an Amazon, but she was like an Amazon, the tall, strong woman. Whereas the Doctor was like, okay, let's figure out how to do this with his mind. She was like, action, all action. Okay, I'm going to kill this thing rather than try and figure out how to, save it. Or, the bad guy needs to be killed, not reformed.
Right, okay.
So very, yeah.
So what other science fiction or fantasy did you connect with growing up?
Let me think. Ooh, that's a I'm trying to think of all the sci-fi fantasy. I remember I liked The Never-Ending Story. Once again,
the book or the movies?
Both. Mm-hmm. And kind of that going into another world. Kind of, I had a lot of surgery, so I watched a lot. I read a lot. And I like the idea of this fanciful story that you read, and then you get to be a part of it.
So what was it? Was it the escape that appealed to you, or the example that it provided for you?
The escape.
The escape.
Yes. I spent a lot of time in hospital beds, and anything that could, even if it was just my mind, take me out of that setting. I remember watching the Dune movie. I didn't read the books till later, because I was a little young.
You're talking about the original
Dune.
Terrible movie? Or did you like that too?
I loved it. I was a little kid when I saw it. My poor parents do not know all the stuff I watched when I was in the hospital and they weren't there. I got to see Jaws at 9.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I watched it. I was like probably young enough to really just enjoy the once again, I think a lot of my, especially when I was little, the sci-fi and fantasy I related to was the escape, the getting away, going somewhere different, and dealing with a new place, a new situation, because I was always stuck in the same place, in the same stuff, and I like that idea of getting away.
Being in a hospital is really boring, huh?
Yes, very boring. And
so now that you're an adult,
yes,
what kind of sci-fi, what kind of geek stuff are you connecting to it? Are you connecting to it the same way as a kid, or has that changed?
Well, I'm still into Doctor Who. I started watching the new stuff. Even with some of my qualms and issues, I still really like it. And I think it's still the same. I connect with the companions, the getting away from your normal everyday life and going on these fantastic adventures. And
who's your favorite companion? Yeah, new companion.
I actually like Rory Williams.
Rory Williams?
Yes.
The guy who sits around for millennia for his wife?
Yes, but on the other hand, he was not enamored of the Doctor. He had his issues, and he had no problem calling him out when he did something questionable, or when Rory felt like this was not the plan of action that should be taken. And I really like that. I like when, somebody stands up and doesn't just fawn over the guy in power, the, guy with the fun box that gets to take you all sorts of places. Yeah, he got to go on all these fantastic adventures, but I think he really tried to keep the Doctor human and keep him accountable.
Okay. How do you feel about the new Doctors compared to the old ones? I mean, they got younger and sexier than the old ones.
I out of the 4 they have, my favorite, I think, was Christopher Eccleston, because I think they did a good job of finding a younger guy, but somebody who had the gravitas and kind of, he could do the playful, but he could also do the serious.
There were moments where he was kind of weird, kind of manic, and didn't expect that from him. No.
Yeah, and that kind of reminded me of the old doctors, and I think they kind of lost the whole, there's more than just one facet where, Dave Tennant was the suave, debonair doctor that was always swishing his coat behind him and, had all the ladies swooning. And Matt Smith was kind of the geeky baby giraffe. And, Peter Capaldi, I'm still trying to get a feel for him. I think he's kind of going back to, he's being a little too serious, but I think they do give him some of the fun moments. And I think if they can find that balance, he can, be more like kind of a throwback.
Okay. Are you happy with where the stories are going now?
With the newer one, yes. With Matt Smith, and they kind of got lost. And
I didn't really care for the I'm the doctor kind of scenes, and I can do these wonderful things.
Yeah, I think they kind of lost their way, and I think they're slowly kind of coming back with the new Doctor. I think one of the things I like about the new Doctor is I think Peter is not just a Doctor Who fan, but he's old school, original. I mean, he's old enough to know when it started, and so he's going to have a different take than the younger guys.
Right. I mean, he's also a very fine actor who's shown up in other times in Doctor Who, and I think in Torchwood he was also in Torchwood.
He was in Torchwood, and no, I think, he is a good actor, and I think he's able to take his acting ability and his knowledge of Doctor Who and old and new and combine it into, I think, a really good character.
I mean, I enjoy Doctor Who. My primary experience with Doctor Who as a kid was not the show, but the novelizations. Yeah. I had discovered in the 5th grade the novelizations in the school library, and I think I read all of them. And they had come out in the 80s of the original episodes. I didn't see an original episode until like 20 years later.
Wow.
My problem with the new episodes is some of them are really, really good, and some of them are awful. Yeah. And the show is so all over the map when it comes to quality. Yeah. Often it's just terrible, and I find now that I'm going back and watching the original Star Trek episodes, it's the same kind of sort of phenomena that sometimes it's really on point and very profound, and other times it's so silly.
You're just
and lazy storytelling, and I really feel that kind of frustration sometimes with Doctor Who.
Yes, that is one of the, I guess, hallmarks. They do some really great, profound stuff, and then you have to sit through the dreck. The silliness, the weird stuff, the stuff you're going, why is this written? Did you have an editor? Did anybody, fact check or continuity check? Right. So, but I think that's one of the things you have to, when you are a fan of Doctor Who, you just kind of have to embrace it. Gotcha.
Now, as a fan, as a geek, do you find yourself, are you, like a lone wolf kind of geek in the sense that you live out your geekdom in the private sphere, or do you go to cons? Are you part of groups? Do you connect in with community?
I think for the most part I'm kind of lone wolf, other than my select friends that are whatever they're into. If we're into the same stuff. When I was in high school, I got into the X-Men because one of my friends, that's what she read. And I started reading her comic books, and that's how we, one of the things we bonded over. And, we'll still get geeky over, the Marvel comic stuff, especially the movies. Hey, did you see this? Hey, this, that, we'll, on Facebook, because she lives in Bluffton, where I went to high school, Bluffton, Ohio.
Bluffton, Ohio, okay.
So, but I think there's certain other things, I think kind of my Doctor Who is very private. It's my thing, other than my family knows I love it, and I just kind of, this past Christmas, my mom actually was surprised. She was like, oh, she got me socks. I knew they were socks because the way they had been wrapped. I'm like, my mom got me socks. But then I unwrapped them, and they were TARDIS socks. And I was like, wow. And she'd gotten them on her own. As far as, something that I think she kind of figured, I don't know if maybe somebody mentioned something, but I was like, oh, wow, okay, so this is apparently, my mom knows at least enough to get me a pair of TARDIS socks. So.
That means a lot, often with parents who don't know at all. Yeah. So is there something you feel like about, let's say, cons and stuff that doesn't appeal to you, or feels
the price?
The price. It's just gotten to be too expensive.
Yeah, a lot of them are expensive. They do have one in Albuquerque, but we found out too late this year. So I don't think it's something I could have gone to this year. But, we now know it's here and it comes, so I might go next year.
Okay, all right. So as...
Yeah.
Well, our audience doesn't know, but at home, you're also a Christian.
Yes.
And so how does your Christian faith connect with, your spina bifida? And how does it... Well, that's the first question. Then I'll ask...
Dangerous question.
Dangerous question.
Dangerous question. How does it connect with my spina bifida? It connects in the fact that I somehow managed to still remain a Christian, still remain religious somehow, in spite of my disability. I have had a lot of anger at God with being born with a disability. Mm-hmm. Why me? Why do I have to go through this? Why do I have to have all these surgeries? Why do I have to be the standout in the crowd? I think it's been a very... My faith is there despite my issues with religion.
I had somebody one time say to me, or ask me,
yeah,
is it true that God doesn't make mistakes? And my response was, that's above my pay grade.
Yes.
I mean, what do you think about that when people say God doesn't make mistakes, or this was for a reason, or this is part of God's plan? Because I assume that you've experienced that.
I usually just kind of smile and nod, or if I feel like I need to say something, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I'm glad you believe that. But I don't know I think there's a part of me that's like, yeah, God makes mistakes. And then a part of me is like, it's actually probably not God's mistake. It's humans' mistake. I mean, we're the ones who brought about sin. Mm-hmm. But it's still easier to blame God than Adam and Eve,
So you think that your disability is a result that things are in some cosmic way not the way they're supposed to be, not as God intends, and that's why stuff happens.
Yeah. I don't think God makes stuff happen, but I think the stuff that does happen isn't meant to happen, if that makes any sense. It's we as humans created sin, or at least brought it. That sounds horrible.
Well, let me ask you this: do you think your spina bifida is a sign of sin? Is a result of sin?
No, I don't think it's a result of sin. My parents were happily married when they created me. No, I don't. I think maybe not like a specific sin, but the general. We're human. We have faults. And, Lord, this is getting into theology, and I have to think.
Yeah, sorry.
Making me think.
I know.
I guess going back to Genesis, that wonderful book that... Anyway, going back to Genesis and the story of the Garden of Eden. And God said, you can do whatever the heck you want, just don't eat that fruit. And we ate the fruit. And so there's this greater sin, this, of human frailty.
There's something inside of us that wants us to do the things that we're not supposed to do.
Yeah.
My daughter, my eldest daughter.
Yes, I know her well.
You know her well. One time, had been doing stuff that she wasn't supposed to be doing. And she said to me, I don't know how not to do the stuff I'm not supposed to do.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, well, that's, a 6-year-old basically describing 2,000 years of Pauline ethics.
Yes.
Out
of the mouths of babes.
But there is something about us that we want to do the things that we know we're not supposed to do. And then there are consequences.
Yeah.
And sometimes I think those consequences are much bigger than just the actions of that one person.
Yeah.
So we have this assumption, because we're in an individualistic Western society,
that
when it comes to sin, the bad stuff is only connected to that person. We don't understand these things in terms of systems.
Yeah.
And that's something that in the Old Testament, there's an understanding of, if sin is not dealt with, the consequences grow and grow, and it becomes systematized, and it goes across generations.
Yeah.
And so maybe that's one way of understanding disabilities. That they're a sign, they're an indicator that something is wrong in the human, the way that humans are.
Yeah.
But it's not specific to what your parents did, and it's certainly not specific to what you have done or not done.
Exactly. I think it's there. Yeah, we have these. I mean, I can go out and commit a sin. I go out and stab somebody. I just committed a crime.
I love the fact that you picked it. You picked murder.
Yeah.
Stabbing. Yes.
Stabbing. Yes. I said something about my psyche. I don't know what, and I don't think I want to know. But, and I go out and stab somebody. I've committed a sin. And that's my personal sin. But there are sins that, we, something like 3 Mile Island. That was a collective, people are still, or Chernobyl. That's better. Chernobyl. That was human frailty. That was human imperfectness in action. And the fallout is still being felt.
Right. When I was in the mid-90s, when I was in high school, I went to Ukraine, and we visited an orphanage. It was in the Donetsk region, which is now where the Civil War
is. Yeah.
And we visited an orphanage, and there was a room where they kept the highly disabled infants, who couldn't take care of themselves. It was one of the most heartbreaking, disturbing things
I can imagine
that I've ever seen, and that was a consequence of this nuclear meltdown in Chernobyl. That these infants and their parents were not responsible for, but they were paying a cost for something they didn't do.
Yeah, and I think we want to individualize sin or put it around a certain group of people, rather than some sins aren't that, they're the greater human failings.
Yeah. Well, let's transition here a little bit. Let me ask the second hard question.
Okay.
How does your faith and your geekdom connect together?
I don't know. No, I do. I think some of the, in high school I watched Star Trek The Next Generation, and some of the issues they dealt with, while they may have been more secular, to me did have some, a lot of the social justice issues, or had, because of my upbringing, my social issue justice, my parents, especially my dad, we went to GE plant because they made parts for nuclear bombs. My dad took us to protest. And it wasn't from it was a social justice issue, but coming from our belief that nuclear weapons are bad because we're pacifists, because that's what being a Mennonite, which is what I am, entails. We're pacifists. We believe in nonviolence, and nuclear bombs are very violent. So watching Star Trek The Next Generation and a lot of the social justice issues they dealt with, some of the issues that were brought up, we're in a secular nature. For me, I saw that, and I was able to relate it back to my faith and my beliefs. And I can't think of any specific examples right now, unfortunately. My brain is kind of fried.
Right. Well,
Yes.
What's interesting about Star Trek, and I also watched The Next Generation.
Yeah.
As it is, I think, in some ways, sort of an idealized fantasy of sort of secular humanism.
Yeah.
And what is it like as a religious person, watching that fantasy?
Yeah.
There's, because of the social justice aspect of it, there's going to be lots of things that I at least connect with, but there are moments when I'm like, wait a minute, this is something else. And so what is that kind of experience for you? Where are the lines? Where are the parts you connect with, and what do you question?
I think the parts I connect with are the humanist parts. You know what? I'm actually going to go back to a couple weeks ago. You were talking about Worf connecting with these disenfranchised Klingons who are with the
Romulans,
yes. And his connecting with them. And I'm like, yes, that's there are people out there who have this duality, and maybe they don't get to see the one side of who they are. A mixed race child may be raised in one environment and not get a whole lot of exposure to the other side. But then, of course, the finding out that the Klingons and what great warriors they are, and having been cut off from this, and that kind of makes me uncomfortable. Once again, as a pacifist, I couldn't really connect with that. I'm like, yeah, the Klingons are great warriors, but is that really such a great thing? And that was my problem. I think when the social justice that you start to invite and make the violence or the use of weaponry, glorify it or justify it, that's when I start to get uncomfortable.
I mean, one of the things that's interesting about Star Trek is, when it comes to the humans, right? It's a very human-centric show, actually. They are all secular.
Yes.
I mean, their belief is and I know I'm going to get angry emails from the tons of people who are listening to this, but the belief in science and the value of science and exploration and human rights.
Yeah,
it's a very secular sort of ideal system.
Yeah.
Whenever Star Trek deals with faith, though, when it just shows a religious system, it's always the aliens.
Yes,
it's the Klingons, it's the Vulcans, sort of.
Yeah.
The Vulcans have weird religious stuff too.
Yes, right? Yes, they do.
It's never the humans.
I never realized that until you now just said that. And that is very interesting. And it makes me wonder, I mean, is it by that time we've become too science-based, or you do not see the value of religion, or is it that religion was such a foreign concept that it belongs to the aliens?
I think it's an othering of religion in the sense that it is something sort of strange and weird and part of the color of an alien culture versus something that is dealt with, I think, in a serious way. Yeah. And that's part of me when it comes to Star Trek that I find rather uncomfortable. Yeah. What are the beliefs of the crew? Yeah. How can you just simply have a happy crew of secular people flying around the universe? I think humanity there will always be an element of humanity that says no to secularism. Yeah. And an element that will embrace some sort of religious explanation, spiritual explanation to what the universe means. Yeah. Well, and I think that I remember one time talking with one of my cousins who at the time he decided he was an atheist, and having a discussion, and he said, well, people need religion to feel comfortable. And I think this is like one of those standard replies. People need religion to feel comfortable because if you have religion and you die, you're going someplace good, whereas if there's no religion, you're just dead. And to me, I think that's a very cynical view, but I don't know, I guess in my own experiences, there's more to it than that. In what way? Well, I look at the way the world works. There's too many patterns. There's too many things that work together that when they shouldn't, for it to just all be random, I guess, in my mind. Mm-hmm. And I have had experiences where I felt another power that's not a ghost. Something in my life, working in my life, that's beyond me. Okay. So, if I can ask you another disability-related question. Go ahead. So, Star Trek The Next Generation. Yeah. And a character of Geordi LaForge had a disabled Sirius regular, which in the 80s was, actually still is a pretty big deal. I can't right now think of any other character, really, that's disabled on a science fiction TV show. Did that mean a lot to you, or... It did, in that fact that they were representing a disability. They were, they were showing that not just like not everybody was, white, or not everybody was human. They had somebody who wasn't the standard normative.
of what you find in these shows. And I appreciate it. I mean, I guess I liked Geordi. He was one of my favorite characters. Part of that was I grew up watching Reading Rainbow.
Me too.
Yes. So I already had an affinity for LeVar Burton, but the fact that he was blind, it may not have been, I mean, that's one of my problems with these disabilities is they need more of them, because I was relating to the blind guy. I'm not blind, and I'm not saying that's wrong, but to have that be my disabled person, that was the one, as far as I can remember, that was the disabled character I could relate to, because that was the only one I could find. And so, I mean, he was probably one of my favorite characters on the show because of that. Mm-hmm. And that, that kind of, as much as they try to include him and make him feel welcome, there's still that outsideness. There's still that step away from the mainstream.
Well, and then in the movie, I think it was the second Next Generation movie, First Contact. They basically removed his disability, right? They gave him some sort of eyes.
I just think, and that just pissed me off.
Yeah. Because
I think I was like really amazed that they would go there, that they would do that. They would make a main character disabled, that they would give him this thing that they eventually just took away, so that they
right. And it had an advantage too.
Yeah.
Right? The visor saw things that normal people couldn't see.
Exactly. There are some issues with that. I don't have as many as my dad. He'll watch something and, the disabled person has some special ability that everybody else doesn't. And so, it's kind of like the wise black man. Mm-hmm. It's the disabled person with the special ability, and it works in the X-Men. I don't think it works quite as much as in Star Trek, but...
Do you relate to Professor X?
In some ways, yes. I like the fact that he was in a wheelchair. I wanted his little hovercraft thing that he went in. I was like, I want that. But I was actually, the characters I was more relatable to, Beast was one, because he stands out. He can't hide who he is. He can't hide his blue fur. So I really liked Beast. And the fact that he was able to handle it very well. I was like, I want to be that. I don't want to be this angry ball of hate towards my disability and towards the world because of my wheelchair. I want to accept it like that. And I'm slowly getting to that point through a lot of things. And then I liked Rogue because, once again, she had the separating herself from the world, because Rogue's the one that where she touches somebody, she absorbs their powers for a certain amount of time. And the fact that she distanced herself, and that was kind of me. I could kind of keep, I could relate to the distancing, keeping my space, because people didn't know me, didn't understand me, and it was easier to keep them away than to have to deal with them and my issues. Mm-hmm. So, but I mean, I like the fact that Charles Xavier was in a wheelchair and had to deal with some of those issues. Not as many as I did, because, he's in a comic book. But I did appreciate that. He is the center, the kind of the figurehead of the X-Men. Mm-hmm. But once again, he's it's okay, I guess it's the X-Men, because they all have their special abilities. But, he's in a wheelchair, but he has this great psychic power.
Yeah. So, what other characters out there who are either disabled or metaphorical disability do you connect with?
Oh my.
I'm trying to think of what other ones out there. Daredevil is blind.
Daredevil's blind. I never really got into Daredevil. It was more of I just thought he was blah.
He is.
He's blah. So
He's blah.
I think Batman is disabled in his emotional abilities.
He's an emotionally
wreck.
Basket
case, and I like that. I like the, because I can sometimes be an emotional basket case. It's not because my parents are dead; they're both very much alive and very loving and caring. But I think the reason why Batman is really well loved is because he is an emotional basket case. He is somebody who has all these issues, but he wants to work through them by trying to save people.
What I like about Batman is that he doesn't have a superpower.
Yes.
It's his gadgets, it's his abilities.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, and it's a way, and to me, I guess, his gadgets and abilities, and being Batman is a way to overcome his disability, his mental issues, and I like that. I like the fact that he's not necessarily fixing himself. I think mental, he's finding a way to work through it or to overcome. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's more important than, the Geordi LaForge miraculously being able to see again.
Right. Another character I was thinking of was Barbara Gordon in Batman. She eventually ends up in a wheelchair.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with her.
She's Commissioner Gordon's daughter.
Yeah.
I can't remember which superhero she ends up being.
I know she's Commissioner Gordon's daughter. You get into the DC universe and we can talk Batman, we can talk a little bit about Superman.
But you get lost.
I get lost.
You're Marvel girl.
I'm Marvel girl. I'm opening myself up a little more to DC now, but I'm Marvel girl.
Why is Marvel better than DC?
It's what I could give you a million reasons, but I'm just going to go with the simplest and the most honest. It's what I grew up with. Mm-hmm. My dad was a Superman, Red Superman. He was a Marvel, so that's what I went with. And I said in high school, I had a friend who read X-Men, got me into X-Men, and kind of got me on the Marvel train, and so that's what I became familiar with. And I have a million and one reasons I can give you why Marvel is better than DC, but honestly, they're nothing because I don't have enough knowledge of DC to be able to really compare them. So it just comes down to it's what I know.
When I was growing up, it was DC, and it was DC because of Batman and Superman, mm-hmm. and I think they had a Star Trek comic book for a while. As a parent now, with two little girls who are getting into comics and getting into superheroes, we have to go with Marvel.
Yeah.
And we have to go with Marvel because I think DC is sort of messing up here on when it comes to the portrayal of women.
Yes.
And we are not going to support something. This, for example, the Wonder Woman Superman sort of hookup girlfriend, boyfriend thing is terrible.
Yes.
And so Marvel, I think is really much more cutting edge.
Yeah.
And is willing to do things that DC isn't.
Yeah.
Including messing around with some pretty beloved characters. And I know you're not a fan of Thor, woman Thor. No. But, also with Ms. Marvel right now and Captain Marvel. And I appreciate that.
Yeah. No, and I understand that. I'm not going into the Thor thing. That's just a long rant for another time. I think it would be more for a women in geekdom. But yeah, I think Marvel has, from what I know of DC, Marvel has done a better job of trying to be more diverse and more open. And at a time when DC was touting one of their Green Lanterns was gay, and apparently my understanding is he wasn't like the main one. He was one of the other Green Lanterns was gay. Marvel was putting the scene of a gay wedding on the front of one of their comic books. So I think that's one of the things I do like is I do find diversity. Not just with my disability, but as a female. And my mom, coming from, her mother was Native American. So the fact that, I don't think they've had a whole lot of Native American. I think that at one point in one of their comic books they did have a Native American character. But just the conscious decision to put minorities in their comics.
So representation matters to you.
Yes. It's
really important for you to see yourself reflected in the kinds of shows you watch and the books you read.
Yeah. And I think when I see a show, one of the soap operas for a while had a little offshoot, and one of the characters went in a wheelchair. And so I watched it because they actually had a character in a wheelchair. They didn't do a lot with him. It was not really all that great. But I watched it because I wanted to see that representation and kind of support it. At the moment, I don't see a lot of that. And so it's kind of hard. It's more, I guess, I think right now, I think I like the fact seeing the women more represented because that's what I am. I'm a female, and I like to see the strong females. Once again, your two daughters who I've come to know and love, have them having strong female characters. at some point, I would like to see what's going on with the females with the disabled population, not just with people like in wheelchairs. And they have had some blind, there were blind characters in the comic book Star Trek. But I have a deaf cousin, and I remember, there at one point in the comics, the Hawkeye they had was deaf. And I think they were coming out with Marvel's coming out at some point with another deaf comic book character. I remember posting an article about it to my cousin, who is deaf, because it's something she can relate to. It's something she can show her kids who, while all three of them are hearing, they have two deaf parents. And it's something they could relate to. And I think I would like to see at some point in the future, in my lifetime, that this surgence of having strong female characters and making sure they're represented and making sure there's strong minority characters happen with the disabled community. And maybe not even just with physical disabilities, but mental, or maybe, things like with autism or other, dyslexia, that sort of stuff, the stuff you don't see or isn't as obvious.
One of the things that was interesting with Guardians of the Galaxy when the movie came out, there was some piece floating around in the internet about Drax the Destroyer.
Yeah.
And his sort of inability to understand metaphor and
yes.
take everything very literally.
Yeah.
I read one account where somebody with autism really connected with that character because it does sort of read as
yes.
a kind of autistic experience.
Yes. Yeah, and I've read those too, and I actually, two of my cousins one's autistic and the other's on the Augsburger spectrum. Mm-hmm. I forget which is which, but I posted that for him, for the one of them, and just to kind of say, hey, look at this. This might be of interest to you when you watch the movie. You might be a character you relate to, and it did help him, and he really did, he likes the character because, once again, he doesn't get metaphor. So whether that was intentional or not, I don't know, but it's nice to see, even if it wasn't intentional, that a community that is on the margins seeing a superhero that they can relate to.
On the other hand, one of the criticisms that I heard about Guardians of the Galaxy, with Rocket Raccoon, was some of his pranks that he played about stealing away, the guy's leg as a joke, and some people felt that was ableism. Did you have that same kind of...
No. Oh, dear. That, to me, that's just sticks up their butts. Sometimes you can make a joke. I make jokes about my disability all the time, and I've horrified some people. And to me, it's like, if you're horrified about me making fun of my disability, you need to get a sense of humor. You need to lighten up. There are sometimes, yes, you have to be careful not to cross a line or take a joke and make it offensive. But I don't know, it's a part of who the character is. And it's a movie, and I think sometimes we get so caught up on having to be PC or be, not offend anybody that we lose the fact that sometimes it's just a joke and it's, funny. And at the time, I think the way it was done was he was coming together with a plan, and so maybe he, you're thinking, oh, wow, I wonder what he's going to do with this leg, and then it's just kind of this throwaway of, oh, I didn't really need it, I just did it for fun. And I guess the other thing is, I can relate to Rocket Raccoon when he's talking about being torn apart and put back together, and all the pain he went through. Well, I went through a lot of surgeries, and it's not exactly not being completely torn apart, but that is, you get things put in, pulled out, and this and that done to you. And I know that feeling. And sometimes you just look at a situation and you just want to inject some humor or do something totally off the wall and bizarre just for your own amusement.
That one shot in the prison where Star-Lord, they're getting, and Raccoon and Rocket are getting doused down, washed. Yeah. And he looks over and he sees sort of the scars on Rocket's back. I thought that was a really interesting moment.
That was a painful moment because I had a lot of back surgeries. Yeah. I guess, yeah. Well, I've not, now that we're talking about it, because watching it just kind of, I connected, but now really thinking about it, I can connect with Rocket because I've been in that kind of situation. I would love to be a little ball of hate that guns down everything.
And hangs out with a giant talking tree.
Yes, a giant talking tree. But, there is. I understand. There is that pain, and so that it does kind of lend itself to a black humor or a dark humor, or where I'm coming up with a plan. I want that guy's leg. It's not a part of the plan. It's just for shits and giggles. Mm-hmm. And I understand that. I can relate to that. And yeah, wow, revelations on podcast. Woohoo!
Woohoo! All right. Well, we've been talking for about almost 50 minutes.
Okay. This is what happens when we get together and actually talk.
It's awesome, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about today?
Hello, I'd like to talk to you about a book written by Jesus Christ.
Oh, please.
Sorry, I just had to.
Yeah.
No, I think we've covered a lot of topics.
Well, since you bring that up, what does it mean for you then as a 21st century Christian living in a society that is mostly or often rather suspicious of faith, and particularly Christians?
So you're asking what it means
for you. Like, what does it mean for you, like, to be living in a world like that? Or do you think about that very often?
What it means to me, I think it means, I don't know, I guess I really haven't thought about it. It's, a lot of times my faith is kind of more private. It's within me. I only share it with select few people. I'm trying to be better about it, but I think for me, if you're offended by my faith or you think I'm, it's suspicious of it, that's your problem. That's what you have to work out. Mm-hmm. I've worked out I'm working out my problems and issues with religion and faith. I see enough in the world and been through enough where I feel like there is a greater power out there. And for me, it's the easiest way to relate to that power as a Christian and through the Mennonite Church. Whereas for somebody else, it may be through Buddhism or through Catholicism or, Islam or, we all find our different paths to God. Mm-hmm. And if you're suspicious of that or contemptuous of that, that is your issue to work out.
I mean, I run into this a lot because of my work.
Yes.
I discovered that being a pastor is a little bit like being Santa Claus, like dressing up as Santa Claus. People don't see you. They see the role. They see the costume. And one of the things I've realized about myself in the almost 4 years that I have done ministry, is that when it comes down to this question of secular versus Christian, right, I consider myself to be a Christian secular in the sense that I'm very comfortable in secular culture.
Yeah.
So this entire comic book geek stuff, which some of my relatives would have a really hard time with.
Yeah.
I am very comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that's been kind of an interesting sort of realization that culturally I'm very secular, even though I do have religious beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's very different from people who are, used to a Christian culture.
Yeah.
And so learning to navigate these things has been part of the challenge.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I think I agree. I agree with what you said.
All right. Well, Abigail, thank you so much for coming on today and having this conversation. And maybe sometime we'll have you on again, and we can talk about more things like this.
Yes, that would be fun. It's cool.
If you like Geek Cross, please help us out and leave us a review on iTunes. You can find Geek Cross on Facebook and Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @GeekCrossShow. You can also email us at geekcrossshow@gmail.com. Geek Cross is a McLaren production. My name is Jeremy Yoder. Thanks for listening.